No one expects their life to change over a bag of spilled oranges. Linda certainly didn't. She was just tired behind on rent and trying to get home in the freezing rain. When she saw the frail old man struggling with his torn grocery bags on the pavement, she didn't see the retired patriarch of the city's most ruthless crime syndicate. She just saw someone's grandfather. So she helped him. She expected a polite thank you. What she got was 4 armed men in tailored suits locking down her cafe the very next morning. The espresso machine at the copper kettle had a slow, insidious leak. It hissed a constant rhythmic sputter that sounded like an old man out of breath. Linda wiped the stainless steel drip tray for the 4th time that hour, her knuckles white, her back aching. It was 9:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. The streets of the South Side were slick with black rain, reflecting the neon hum of the liquor store across the avenue. She was 27, running on 4 hours of sleep, and intimately familiar with the exact cost of failure. Failure looked like the final notice from the bank, sitting unopened by the register. It smelled like stale coffee grounds and cheap pine cleaner. Linda flipped the open sign to closed, locked the deadbolt, and pulled the blinds down. Outside, the rain had turned into a miserable, freezing drizzle. She pulled her wool coat tight across her chest, shoved her hands into her pockets, and began the 6-block walk to her apartment. The streetlights flickered, casting long, erratic shadows across the wet pavement. That was when she heard the tear of wet paper, followed immediately by the dull thud of heavy items hitting concrete and a soft curse. Linda stopped. Half a block down, an old man was kneeling on the sidewalk. He looked impossibly frail, swallowed up by a dark, heavy trench coat that had seen better decades. A brown paper grocery bag had given out in the damp air, spilling a scattered mess of oranges, glass jars, and wrapped butcher paper into the gutter. Linda sighed. A deep, bone-weary sigh. She just wanted to go home. She wanted to take off her wet boots and stare at the ceiling. But she didn't keep walking. She jogged over the soles of her boots, slapping against the wet concrete. "Hey, don't touch the glass, I've got it." The old man looked up. His face was a map of deep, weathered lines, but his eyes were sharp, piercingly dark, entirely alert. He didn't look flustered, just profoundly annoyed. "The structural integrity of paper bags in this city is a goddamn insult," he muttered, his voice a gravelly rasp. "It's the rain," Linda said, dropping to a crouch. She scooped up 3 oranges and a heavy glass jar of imported olives. She took off her canvas tote bag, the one she usually used for her gym clothes, and started loading the groceries into it. Paper and water don't mix. They used to make them thicker, he argued, watching her work. Now everything is cheap. Tell me about it. Linda gathered the butcher-wrapped packages. They felt heavy. Expensive cuts. "You shouldn't be out in this. It's freezing." "I needed fresh air. My house is a tomb," the old man said. He grabbed his cane, leaning heavily on it, as he pulled himself up. His joints popped audibly. "And I wanted my own damn groceries." Linda stood up, slinging the canvas tote over her shoulder. It was heavy, easily 20 pounds. "Where do you live?" 3 blocks north, Chestnut Street. Chestnut Street was the dividing line. North of it, the brownstones were pristine, the cars were imported, and the property taxes were astronomical. South of it was Linda's world. "I'll walk you," Linda said. It wasn't a question. "You don't have to do that. I have a phone. I can call a car." He patted his coat pocket, but a grimace crossed his face. He'd forgotten it. "Yeah, well, you didn't. Let's go before we both catch pneumonia." They walked in silence for the first block. Linda matched his slow, deliberate pace. He didn't shuffle like most men his age. He walked with a stiff, prideful limp. He smelled faintly of expensive cigar smoke, peppermint, and old dust. "You run that coffee shop," he said suddenly. The one with the copper bell on the door. Linda blinked, surprised. You've been in there. Once. Your espresso is too bitter. You burn the beans. Linda let out a sharp, genuine laugh. I don't burn the beans. The machine is older than I am, and the boiler pressure is shot. But thanks for the glowing review. A small, raspy chuckle escaped him. You don't mince words, do you? Can't afford to. What's your name, girl? Linda. Linda Hayes. Arthur, he said. He didn't offer a last name. They reached the corner of Chestnut Street. The houses here were imposing fortresses of dark brick and wrought iron. Arthur stopped in front of a particularly massive brownstone. There were no lights on inside. This is me, he said. He reached into his coat. Let me pay you for the delivery, Linda Hayes. Don't insult me, Arthur, Linda said, flatly, pulling the groceries out of her tote and transferring them back into his arms, stacking them carefully so they wouldn't slip. I didn't carry your olives for a tip. Arthur paused. His hand hovered over his pocket. He looked at her, really looked at her, assessing her in the dim glow of the street lamp. Most people take the money. I'm not most people. Have a good night. Make sure you dry off. Linda turned on her heel and walked away. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen a sleek black sedan roll silently to a stop at the curb, just as Arthur reached his stoop, and the frantic, panicked faces of the men who poured out of it to flank the old man. She just went home, took off her wet boots, and forgot the whole thing entirely. The morning rush at the Copper Kettle was the only thing keeping the lights on. Between 7 a.m. and 8:30 a.m., Linda served nurses off the night shift construction workers, needing a jolt, and exhausted college students. It was loud. It was chaotic. It was survival. At 7:15 a.m., the copper bell above the door chimed. Linda didn't look up from the steaming wand. "Be right with you," she yelled over the roar of the milk. The low hum of conversation in the cafe suddenly died. It didn't taper off. It vanished instantly like a radio being unplugged. Linda tapped the metal pitcher against the counter, breaking the foam, and looked up. 4 men had walked into the cafe. They were massive. Not just tall, but built with a dense, muscular thickness that their impeccably tailored dark suits couldn't hide. They didn't look like bankers. They didn't look like lawyers. They looked like violence wrapped in expensive wool. They fanned out. One locked the front door, flipping the sign back to closed. One stood by the front window, his eyes scanning the street. One moved to the back hallway that led to the restrooms. The largest of them, a man with a flattened nose and dead dark eyes, walked straight to the counter. The 3 customers sitting at the window tables stood up in unison. They didn't ask questions. They left their half-eaten pastries. They hurried past the man guarding the door, who silently unlocked it, just long enough for them to slip out, then locked it again. Linda stood frozen, her hand gripping the handle of the milk pitcher, so tightly her fingers cramped. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. "What are you doing?" Linda demanded. Her voice shook just a fraction, but she hated herself for it. "Unlock that door. You're scaring my customers away." The man at the counter didn't blink. He looked at the menu board, then down at the display case of muffins, then finally at her. "Linda Hayes." "Who is asking?" "Are you Linda Hayes?" His voice was a low, resonant baritone. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. "Yes. And if you're here to rob me, you're out of luck. The register has about $40 in 5s and 1s. Take it and get out." The man looked entirely unamused. "We are not here for your money." "Then what do you want? Coffee?" She slammed the metal pitcher onto the counter. Hot milk splashed onto her apron. "Because if you're not buying anything, you're trespassing. I will call the police." The man at the door let out a short, quiet snort of amusement. Call them if it makes you feel better, the large man at the counter said smoothly. We are just waiting for the boss. Your boss? Linda grabbed the dirty bar towel and wiped the counter aggressively, channeling her adrenaline into the repetitive motion. I don't know your boss. I don't know you. You are ruining my morning rush, and I can't afford this. Get out! No. It was a simple word delivered with zero malice, which made it infinitely more terrifying. For the next 10 minutes, Linda stood behind the counter in agonizing silence. She thought about making a run for the back door, but she remembered the suit standing in the hallway. She thought about grabbing the heavy iron tamper used for the espresso, weighing it in her hand. It would crack a skull, sure. But there were 4 of them. The cafe felt suffocating. The smell of roasted coffee suddenly made her nauseous. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and the rain tapping against the front window. At exactly 7:30 a.m., a black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb directly in front of the cafe. It was armored. Linda could tell by the heavy, unnatural way the doors opened and the thick, dark tint on the windows. The man by the door immediately straightened, unlocking the deadbolt and stepping back. The driver stepped out first, opening the rear door with an umbrella ready. A man stepped onto the pavement. He paused for a moment, adjusting his cuffs, looking at the peeling paint on the facade of the copper kettle. Even from behind the glass, Linda could feel the shift in the air. The 4 bodyguards inside seemed to hold their breath. He walked through the door. He was younger than she expected, maybe early 30s. He wore a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than her entire cafe. His dark hair was neatly styled, but there was a harsh, unforgiving edge to his jawline. His eyes were the color of slate, scanning the room in a fraction of a second before landing squarely on Linda. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like an apex predator who had learned how to use a fork and knife. He walked up to the counter. The large man who had been standing there stepped aside instantly, dipping his head in a subtle show of deference. The new arrival looked at Linda. He looked at the stained apron, the dark circles under her eyes, the white-knuckled grip she still had on the bar towel. 2 black coffees, he said. His voice was quiet, smooth, and laced with absolute authority. If you please. Linda swallowed hard. Are you the boss? I am. Tell your men to leave my cafe. The man tilted his head slightly. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of his mouth. Make the coffee, Miss Hayes. Then we will talk. Linda glared at him. Her survival instinct was screaming at her to comply, but her sheer exhaustion and anger at the lost revenue flared up. $3 each, up front. The large bodyguard shifted his face, darkening with anger, but the boss simply raised a hand, stopping him dead. He pulled a slim leather wallet from his jacket, extracted a crisp $100 bill, and laid it on the counter. Keep the change. I hear the boiler pressure is shot. Linda's blood ran cold. I hear the boiler pressure is shot. She stared at the bill. Then she turned around, grabbed 2 ceramic mugs, and pulled the shots. Her hands were shaking. Linda set the 2 mugs on the counter. The espresso machine hissed its familiar dying breath in the background. The man didn't touch the coffee right away. He just stood there, exuding a quiet, heavy stillness. Who are you? Linda finally asked, her voice tight. My name is Nicholas. Nicholas Costello. The name meant nothing to her. She didn't follow local politics, and she definitely didn't follow the police blotter. Okay, Nicholas Costello, you bought your coffee. Now explain why you're holding my business hostage. Nicholas took a slow sip of the coffee. He didn't wince at the bitterness. Last night around 10 o'clock you encountered an elderly man on the corner of 4th and Elm. He had dropped his groceries. Linda's brow furrowed. Arthur. What does Arthur have to do with you? Arthur is my grandfather. Nicholas said softly. He set the mug down. He has a habit of slipping away from his detail. He hates being watched. He thinks he is still 30 years old and untouchable. He went out to buy olives and short rib because he didn't like the chef's attitude. Okay, Linda said, utterly confused. He slipped his detail. He dropped his bag. I carried it. Why does that warrant an armed invasion of my cafe? Nicholas looked at her for a long, silent moment. The cynicism in his eyes was heavy, an old weariness that didn't match his face. My grandfather was the head of our family's business for 40 years. He made a lot of money. He made a lot more enemies. We have a strict protocol for his movements. Last night he broke it. Linda crossed her arms. He seemed fine to me, just cranky. He was a block and a half away from being murdered, Miss Hayes. The words dropped into the quiet cafe like lead weights. Linda stopped breathing for a second. What? There were 2 men waiting in an idling car at the end of Elm Street. Nicholas explained, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. They had been tracking his routine. They knew he sometimes went to that specific market. They were waiting for him to cross the alleyway near 5th. It's a blind spot. Linda felt a cold sweat prickle at her hairline. She remembered the dark alley. She remembered the silence of the rain. They were going to pull him into the car or just shoot him on the pavement, Nicholas continued. But then you showed up. I just picked up his oranges. You walked with him, Nicholas corrected. You stayed on the street side. You talked to him. You made him visible. And more importantly, the men in the car couldn't get a clean shot or a clean grab without dealing with a civilian witness. Nicholas reached out and tapped the rim of his ceramic mug. You disrupted their window of opportunity. By the time you dropped him off, my men had located him and secured the perimeter. The car sped off. Linda stared at him, her mind spinning. The heavy canvas bag, the smell of rain and cigar smoke, the absolute mundanity of the moment. She had walked an old man home. She hadn't realized she was walking him through a firing squad. I didn't know, she whispered. I know you didn't, Nicholas said. We ran a background check on you last night. Linda Hayes, 27, no criminal record, drowning in debt from a business loan you took out to buy this place 2 years ago. You work 14-hour days. You have no affiliations. You were just kind. The word sounded strange coming from him, like it was a foreign language he was translating poorly. So, Linda said, her voice finding some of its grit again, you came to say thank you. A card would have sufficed. Nicholas didn't smile. My family does not deal in thank you cards, Miss Hayes. You saved my grandfather's life. In our world, a debt of that magnitude is a heavy thing. It must be balanced. I don't want your money, Linda snapped, pushing the $100 bill back toward him across the counter. I helped an old man. That's it. We're square. We are not square, Nicholas said, ignoring the money. The men in that car, they saw you. They have dash cams. They have operatives. They know a woman with dark hair and a canvas bag walked Arthur Costello home. They know you ruined their contract. Linda's stomach plummeted. The room suddenly felt entirely too hot. What are you saying? I am saying that whoever put the hit out on my grandfather is currently very unhappy with you. Nicholas gestured to the 4 massive men standing around the cafe. Which is why Luca, Matteo, Jonas, and Enzo are here. Linda looked at the 4 men. They stared back, blank and immovable. They aren't here to intimidate you, Miss Hayes, Nicholas said, buttoning his jacket as he stepped back from the counter. They are your new security detail. They will stay here during your operating hours. 2 of them will escort you home. They will sleep in cars outside your apartment, until I find the men who tried to kill my grandfather and put them in the ground. My men belong to you." "No!" Linda blurted out, panic finally breaking through her anger. "No, absolutely not! You can't just occupy my life. I run a business. People won't come in if 4 mafia enforcers are standing by the pastry case. They will learn to adapt," Nicholas said smoothly. "I don't want them here." "That is entirely irrelevant," Nicholas replied. His tone left absolutely no room for negotiation. He turned toward the door. "Luca." The large man with the flattened nose stepped forward. "Yes, boss. Buy a pastry. Sit at the table by the door. Do not let anyone bother Miss Hayes." "Understood." Nicholas looked back at Linda one last time. There was a flicker of something in his slate-grey eyes. Not pity, but a cold, hard acknowledgement of the mess he had just dragged her into. "Keep the 100, he said. "Get the boiler fixed. Your espresso really is terrible." He walked out the door, the bell chiming brightly behind him. The black SUV swallowed him up and drove away into the rain, leaving Linda staring at 4 heavily armed mobsters who were now aggressively eyeing her blueberry muffins. By Thursday, the sheer absurdity of the situation had settled into a grim, exhausting routine. Linda wiped down the counter, her eyes darting to the corner booth. They were still there. They were always there. Luca the behemoth with the flattened nose had claimed the stool nearest the register. He drank exactly 1 cup of black tea every 4 hours, and spent the rest of his time staring at the door with the unblinking intensity of a gargoyle. Matteo and Jonas occupied the booth by the window, playing a never-ending silent game of gin rummy. Enzo stood in the back hallway by the restroom's hands, clasped in front of him, looking like a bouncer at the world's most depressing nightclub. They didn't speak to the customers. They barely spoke to each other. But their presence was a black hole that sucked the oxygen right out of the copper kettle. Linda's morning rush had dwindled to a trickle. The nursing students took one look through the window, saw the 4 men in tailored suits radiating hostility, and kept walking toward the corporate chain down the street. The construction workers came in, bought their drip coffee in total silence, and left without leaving a tip in the jar. "You're killing me," Linda said. She slammed a ceramic mug down in front of Luca. He blinked slowly, pulling his gaze away from a teenage girl who had just walked in to use the Wi-Fi. The girl was visibly trembling. "You are literally bankrupting me." Linda continued, keeping her voice low but sharp. "Look at her. She thinks you're going to harvest her organs." Luca looked at the teenager. "I have no interest in her organs. She doesn't know that." Linda dragged a hand down her tired face. "You guys have to stop glaring at everyone. You look like you're casing a bank. Can't you at least pretend to read a newspaper? Smile, do you know how to smile?" Luca's facial expression remained entirely blank. "Mr. Costello did not instruct us to smile. He instructed us to ensure you do not get shot. No one is shooting at me, Luca. It's a coffee shop on the south side. The biggest threat in here is the expiration date on the half and half." "You are naive, Miss Hayes," Luca said. He picked up his tea. "The men who track Arthur Costello do not care about your half and half." Linda walked away before she threw the hot tea in his face. She couldn't afford the assault charge, and she suspected getting blood out of Luca's wool suit would be impossible. She moved to the tables, gathering empty cups. The financial anxiety was a tight, coiled spring in her stomach. Rent was due in 6 days. The supplier needed to be paid on Friday. She was down 20% in revenue since Nicholas Costello had invaded her life. The irony was suffocating. They were protecting her from a hypothetical bullet, but they were going to let her starve to death in the process. A crash pulled her from her thoughts. Linda spun around. a frail woman in a floral cardigan. Mrs. Gable, a retired librarian who came in every Tuesday and Thursday, had dropped her ceramic plate. Half a blueberry scone lay scattered across the linoleum, surrounded by porcelain shards. Mrs. Gable was staring wide-eyed and terrified at Jonas. Jonas had stood up from his gin-rummy game the second the plate shattered his hand, instinctively dropping to the slight bulge beneath his suit jacket. "Jesus Christ," Linda hissed. She rushed over. "Mrs. Gable, it's okay. Don't touch the glass." I just slipped." The older woman stammered, her eyes darting from Jonas to the door. "I should go. No, sit down. I'll get you a new scone." Linda shot a venomous look at Jonas. "Sit. Down." Jonas looked at Luca. Luca gave a microscopic nod. Jonas slowly lowered himself back into the booth. Linda grabbed the broom and dustpan from the back. When she returned, she stopped dead in her tracks. Enzo, the silent sentinel from the restroom hallway, was on his hands and knees. He had taken one of the clean bar towels and was methodically sweeping the porcelain shards into a neat pile. His incredibly expensive suit pants were pressed against the sticky linoleum. Linda stood there, broom in hand, utterly paralyzed by the sight. "What are you doing?" Enzo didn't look up. "Hazard removal." "You're cleaning my floor." The elderly woman was distressed. Distress causes erratic movement. Erratic movement complicates threat assessment. Enzo gathered the last of the crumbs, stood up in one fluid motion, and dumped the debris into the trash can. He handed Linda the dirty towel. "Also, you missed a spot under table 4. He walked back to his post by the restrooms, his face perfectly impassive. Linda stared after him, then down at Mrs. Gable, who looked like she might faint. "They're court-ordered community service." Linda lied smoothly, handing Mrs. Gable a fresh plate. "Don't mind them. They're just very enthusiastic." That night, when Linda finally locked the door, she didn't walk home. She couldn't. Matteo and Jonas walked 3 paces behind her the entire way. They didn't speak. They didn't complain about the biting wind. When she unlocked her apartment building, they stayed on the sidewalk. Linda went up to her second-floor window and looked down through the blinds. A black sedan was parked across the street. She could see the faint, cherry-red glow of a cigarette behind the driver's side glass. She pulled the blinds shut, sat on her faded thrift store sofa, and cried. Not a loud, dramatic sob, just a quiet, exhausted leak of tears. She was trapped. She had survived abusive landlords, predatory bank loans, and the daily grind of poverty, only to be taken hostage by a favor she never meant to do. Friday night brought a storm that felt personal. The rain came down in aggressive sideways sheets, turning the streetlights into blurry halos. The wind rattled the loose window pane near the front door of the copper kettle, a sound Linda usually tuned out. Tonight it set her teeth on edge. It was 9:15 p.m. The cafe was empty, except for her and the detail. Linda was closing out the register. The drawer was depressingly light. She counted the singles twice, hoping she had miscalculated, but the math remained brutally indifferent. She was going to be short for the supplier. "You should close early." Linda looked up. Matteo was standing near the pastry case. He was the youngest of the 4, with sharp cheekbones and dark circles under his eyes that rivaled her own. "I close at 10, Linda said flatly. "Those are the hours. No one is coming in this weather." "Someone might." She snapped the register drawer shut. "A hospital worker, a night watchman. I need the $5. Matteo looked like he wanted to argue, but the rigid hierarchy of his world kept his mouth shut. He returned to the window, peering out through the slatted blinds into the dark, rain-slicked street. Linda turned her back to the front window to wipe down the espresso machine. She grabbed the wet rag and began scrubbing a stubborn milk stain off the steam wand. The sound didn't register as a threat at first. It was a high-pitched squeal of rubber on wet pavement, followed immediately by a sharp, cracking pop. It sounded like a firecracker. Before Linda could turn her head, the front window of the copper kettle exploded inward. It wasn't a shatter. It was a detonation. Thousands of tiny glass cubes rained across the cafe, pinging against the tables, the metal chairs, and the linoleum floor. The wind howled through the massive new hole in the facade, bringing the freezing rain with it. Down! A massive weight hit Linda from the side. The air was driven from her lungs as she was tackled hard into the narrow space behind the counter. She hit the rubber matting, scraping her elbow against the bottom of the cabinetry. Luca was on top of her, pressing her flat against the floor. He felt like a slab of concrete. He had drawn a heavy matte black pistol from his shoulder holster in a fraction of a second. His eyes were wide, scanning the space above the counter. "Matteo!" Luca barked. His voice was a harsh, guttural roar that Linda had never heard before. Car kept moving, black Lincoln, heading south on 5th. Matteo yelled back. There was the sound of crunching glass as he moved. Enzo secure the back Jonas perimeter. Linda lay pinned to the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs, so violently she thought they might crack. She couldn't breathe. The smell of ozone-wet concrete and roasted coffee filled the tight space. She felt a warm trickle on her forearm and realized a piece of flying glass had grazed her. "Stay down," Luca ordered. He didn't look at her. He slowly rose to a crouch, his gun leveled at the shattered window. For 3 agonizing minutes, the only sound was the wind ripping through the cafe and the hiss of the rain. Linda stared at the underside of the espresso counter, a dead roach trap sitting inches from her nose. Her mind went completely blank. The cynical armor she wore every day evaporated, leaving behind nothing but raw, primal terror. "Clear," Enzo's voice called from the back. "Street is empty," Matteo confirmed from the front. Luca slowly took his weight off Linda. He holstered his weapon and reached down, grabbing her by the bicep to haul her up. His grip was bruising. Linda stood up on shaking legs. She looked at her cafe. It was ruined. The massive front window was entirely gone. Glass covered every surface. The rain was blowing in, soaking the tables and the display case. A single jagged hole was punched through the menu board above the counter, right where Linda's head had been, seconds before the glass broke. It wasn't a brick. It was a bullet. Linda stared at the hole in the menu board. They shot at me. It was a warning, Luca said grimly. He was already pulling a burner phone from his pocket. If they wanted you dead, they would have used a rifle from the roof across the street. They used a handgun from a moving car in the rain. They want you terrified. They want Mr. Costello to know they found you. "I am terrified," Linda whispered. Her knees gave out. She grabbed the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. 20 minutes later, the black armored SUV pulled onto the curb, throwing its hazard lights on. Nicholas Costello walked through the shattered window frame, crunching glass under his expensive leather shoes. He wore a dark overcoat over a simple black sweater, looking like a shadow stepped out of the night. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying rage. He didn't look at his men. He walked straight behind the counter to where Linda was sitting on a milk crate, wrapped in a blanket Enzo had found in the back room. Nicholas stopped in front of her. He looked at the blood drying on her forearm. He looked at her pale, shaking face. "Did they hit you?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Just glass," Linda managed to say. Her voice sounded thin and raspy. "They shot my menu board." Nicholas looked up at the bullet hole. A muscle in his jaw feathered. He turned to Luca. "Who?" "Lincoln Town car. Plates were muddy, likely stolen." Luca reported mechanically. Drive-by. One shooter. Nicholas turned back to Linda. He crouched down so he was eye level with her. Up close, Linda could see the dark circles under his eyes, the heavy exhaustion that mirrored her own, just born of a very different kind of stress. I am sorry, Nicholas said. Linda looked at him. A flare of anger finally cut through the panic. You're sorry my window is gone. My cafe is a crime scene. Someone just tried to put a bullet in my head because I carried a bag of oranges. Sorry doesn't fix this. Nicholas didn't flinch at her outburst. He absorbed it entirely. I know. The police have not been called. They will not be called. My men will clean this up. Clean it up. Linda stood up, dropping the blanket. She pointed at the massive hole in the wall. How do you clean that up, Nicholas? I don't have the insurance for this. I can't afford a new pane of commercial glass. I can't afford to close for 3 days while it gets fixed. I am ruined. Nicholas stood up slowly. He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. He typed out a brief message and hit send. A crew will be here in 20 minutes to board it up, Nicholas said, his voice returning to that smooth, authoritative calm. A contractor will be here at 6 a.m. tomorrow to install bullet-resistant polycarbonate glass. Your espresso machine needs a new boiler. My men noticed the pressure drop. A technician will replace it tomorrow afternoon. It is all paid for. Linda stared at him, the anger stalling out in her chest. I can't accept that. You don't have a choice, Nicholas said bluntly. You are in my crossfire, Linda. I do not let civilians bleed for my family's debts. You will accept the repairs. You will accept the lost revenue compensation I will wire to your business account tomorrow. And you will let my men continue to protect you until I find the people in that Lincoln. And if you don't find them, Nicholas looked past her out into the dark, rainy street. The look in his eyes was so violently cold it made the freezing wind feel warm by comparison. I will find them, he said. Go home, Linda. Luca will drive you. Lock your doors. The contractor arrived exactly at 6 a.m. on Saturday. By 10 a.m., the gaping hole in the copper kettle was filled with a thick, heavy pane of polycarbonate that looked identical to the old glass, but felt like a bank vault. Linda stood behind the counter staring at it. The cafe smelled of fresh cork and lingering fear. The espresso machine, now sporting a brand-new internal boiler, sat quietly behind her. It didn't hiss. The silence was unnerving. The copper bell above the door chimed. Linda stiffened her hand, instinctively reaching for the heavy metal tamper. It wasn't a hitman. It was Arthur. The old man walked in, leaning heavily on his cane. He wore a camel-hair coat today, looking every bit the retired king. Behind him walked Nicholas, looking distinctly irritated, followed by 2 new bodyguards Linda hadn't seen before. Luca, who had resumed his post by the register, immediately stood up straighter. Arthur ignored the bodyguards. He walked to the center of the cafe, tapping his cane against the floorboards, and inspected the new window. Polycarbonate. Arthur observed his raspy voice, filling the quiet room. Good. Stops a .45 caliber cold. Though it scratches easily, you'll have to use a softer rag to clean it. Linda crossed her arms. I'll keep that in mind the next time a cartel drives by Arthur. Arthur turned to look at her. He didn't offer pity. He offered a slow, approving nod. You're still standing. Most people would have taken a bus out of state by now. I have a lease, Linda said dryly, and a very angry loan officer. Running away requires a budget. Nicholas stepped forward, pinching the bridge of his nose. Grandfather, we shouldn't be here. The perimeter is compromised. This location is known. This location serves coffee. Arthur snapped back, dismissing his grandson with a wave of his hand. and I am tired of being locked in that mausoleum you call a safe house. A man shot a window. Am I supposed to cower under my bed?" Arthur walked up to the counter. He reached into his deep coat pocket and pulled out a heavy foil-lined bag. He placed it on the counter with a thud. "Ethiopian yirgachefe," Arthur said. "Light roast, floral notes. Stop buying that dark roasted ash you serve. It ruins the palate." Linda looked at the bag of incredibly expensive coffee beans, then up at the former Mafia Boss. "You came into an active target zone to critique my inventory. I came to apologize," Arthur said. The gravel in his voice softened just a fraction. He looked at the small bandage on Linda's forearm. "I am an old, stubborn man. I wanted to buy my own groceries because I hate feeling useless. My pride put a bullet through your business and a target on your back. I am sorry, Linda Hayes." Linda was taken aback. She had expected arrogance. She had expected mafia posturing. She hadn't expected a genuine, grounded apology from a man who used to run the city's underworld. She looked at Nicholas. He was watching his grandfather with a mixture of deep respect and agonizing stress. Linda suddenly realized that Nicholas wasn't just a boss. He was a grandson, trying to keep a stubborn old man alive in a world that wanted him dead. The heavy weariness in Nicholas's eyes made perfect sense now. He was carrying the weight of a violent empire he hadn't built, trying to protect the man who had. Linda exhaled a long, tired breath. She reached out and took the bag of beans. "Fine," she said. "But if I use these, I'm charging $5 a cup, and you're paying." A small, genuine smile cracked Arthur's weathered face. "Deal." Linda turned to the espresso machine. She ripped open the bag. The smell was intoxicating, rich, bright, and complex. She loaded the grinder, let the new boiler heat the water to the perfect temperature, and pulled a shot. The machine purred smoothly. The liquid gold poured into the ceramic cup with a thick, perfect crema. She set the cup in front of Arthur. Arthur lifted the tiny cup, inhaled the aroma, and took a sip. He closed his eyes. "Passable," he lied. It was clearly the best coffee he'd had in weeks. Nicholas watched the exchange, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. He stepped up to the counter, leaning against the polished wood. "I appreciate you staying open, Linda," Nicholas said quietly, ensuring Arthur couldn't hear him over the grinder. "It helps keep up appearances. If you run, they smell blood." "I'm not doing it for your appearances, Nicholas," Linda said, wiping down the counter. "I'm doing it because I refuse to let some idiot in a Lincoln ruin my life's work. But let's get one thing straight." She leaned in, dropping her voice. "You fix this. You find whoever shot at my cafe, and you make them go away. Because if I have to spend one more week watching Enzo sweep my floors like a psycho, I'm going to take that tamper and crack his skull myself." Nicholas looked at her. For the first time since she met him, a genuine look of amusement flashed across his slate-grey eyes. The smirk returned to the corner of his mouth. "Understood, Miss Hayes," Nicholas said. "I will expedite the process. Enzo is very particular about lint." "And another thing," Linda added, pointing a wet finger at him. "Tell Luca he is allowed to blink. He's terrifying the nursing students." Nicholas let out a quiet, rough laugh. It was a good sound, stripping away the Mafia Boss exterior and leaving behind a tired man who appreciated a moment of absurdity. "I'll have a word with him," Nicholas promised. "Now pour me a cup of my grandfather's expensive beans. Put it on his tab." The third week brought a bizarre, terrifying kind of domesticity. Linda didn't stop hating the situation, but human beings are horribly adaptable creatures. She learned that Matteo liked the crusts cut off his day-old danishes. She learned that Jonas had a daughter in middle school and was intensely stressed about her math grades. She even managed to get Luca to move his stool 3 inches to the left, so the nursing students didn't have to make eye contact with him to reach the sugar packets. Business slowly stabilized. The regulars realized that the 4 giant men in suits weren't actually going to shake them down for their pocket change. The South Side was a practical neighborhood. If the coffee was hot and the Wi-Fi worked, people would eventually ignore a localized mafia occupation. It was a Thursday night, 11:30 p.m. The cafe was officially closed. The heavy deadbolt was thrown. Enzo and Jonas were outside in the idling sedan. Luca and Matteo were in the back room, quietly reviewing the perimeter feeds on a tablet. Linda was scrubbing the floor behind the counter. She liked the quiet. The repetitive motion of the mop was the only thing that unclenched the knots in her shoulders. Then came a heavy dragging sound at the back door. Linda froze. The mop handle slipped in her sweaty palms. The back door opened into the alley. It was made of solid steel, heavily reinforced after the window incident. A sharp, rhythmic knock followed. 2 fast, 1 slow. Luca was out of the back room in less than a second, his gun already drawn and pointed at the steel door. Matteo was right behind him, covering the angle. They didn't shout. The silence was professional and deadly. Luca stepped to the side of the doorframe and peered through the heavy, reinforced peephole. He exhaled sharply, lowering his weapon. He threw the deadbolt and yanked the door open. Nicholas stumbled in. He didn't walk. He practically fell over the threshold. Matteo caught him by the shoulders, hauling him inside, before Luca slammed the door shut and locked it again. Linda dropped the mop. What happened? Nicholas looked terrible. His charcoal overcoat was missing. His white dress shirt was soaked in a dark, spreading stain across his left side. His breathing was shallow and wet. The immaculate, untouchable boss was gone, replaced by a man actively bleeding out on her freshly mopped floor. "Get him to the back," Luca ordered, his voice tight. "Matteo, secure the alley. Make sure he wasn't followed." "I wasn't," Nicholas rasped, coughing. A thin line of blood trickled down his chin. Switched cars 3 times, dropped the tail at the rail yard. "Boss, you need a doctor," Luca said, wrapping an arm around Nicholas's waist to support his weight. "No hospitals," Nicholas grunted, waving him off. "They have eyes in the ERs. Bring the kit from the trunk." Luca dragged Nicholas into the small break room. It was cramped, smelling of cleaning supplies and stale uniforms. He eased Nicholas onto the small, cheap folding table Linda used for her lunch breaks. The metal legs groaned in protest. Linda stood in the doorway, staring at the blood dripping onto the linoleum. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "You can't do surgery in my break room." "Miss Hayes, step back," Luca commanded. He ripped Nicholas's shirt open. The wound was ugly, a jagged, torn furrow carved through the meat of his ribs just below his armpit. It wasn't a clean puncture. "Bullet grazed the ribs, didn't enter the cavity," Nicholas said, his voice strained. He tilted his head back, his eyes squeezing shut. "Tore the muscle, bleeding heavily." Luca sprinted past Linda out the back door and returned 30 seconds later with a heavy black duffel bag. He unzipped it, pulling out gauze pressure bandages and a bottle of iodine. His massive hands were remarkably steady, but he hesitated. "I can plug a hole, boss," Luca muttered, "but I can't stitch this. It's too wide." Linda watched the blood pool on the white plastic table. She watched Nicholas's face, pale and tight with agony. The cynical, exhausted part of her brain screamed to walk away, to call an ambulance, and wash her hands of this entire violent mess. But she remembered the dark alley. She remembered the shattered glass. She remembered Arthur's quiet apology. "Move," Linda said. Luca looked up, surprised. "I said move," Linda shoved past him. She went to the industrial sink in the corner and scrubbed her hands with harsh antibacterial soap, the water running scalding hot. "I spent 2 years in nursing school before the loans drowned me. I know how to suture a laceration. Nicholas opened his eyes, looking at her through a haze of pain. You burn coffee, Linda. Shut up, she snapped, grabbing a pair of latex gloves from the cleaning shelf and snapping them on. I'm better with a needle than I am with a boiler. She stepped up to the table. The smell of copper was thick in the air. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the bottle of iodine and poured it generously over the open wound. Nicholas's back arched off the table. A raw, guttural sound tore from his throat. His hand shot out, grabbing the edge of the metal table with enough force to bend the lip. Hold him down, Linda told Luca. Luca clamped his heavy hands onto Nicholas's shoulders. Linda dug into the black duffel bag. She found a pre-threaded suture kit meant for field trauma. It was thick, heavy-duty nylon. This is going to suck, Linda said, her voice dropping its anger, leaving only cold, clinical focus. Just do it. Nicholas breathed, his forehead shining with sweat. Linda went to work. Her hands didn't shake. The muscle memory from endless hours in the campus clinic took over. She pierced the torn flesh, pulling the heavy thread through, tying off the knots with sharp, precise movements. It was a brutal, ugly repair job, but it was effective. For 20 minutes, the only sounds in the back room were the wet pull of the thread, Nicholas's harsh breathing, and the hum of the refrigerator. When she tied off the final stitch, there were 16 jagged black knots, pulling the wound closed. She layered thick gauze over it, securing it tightly with medical tape. Linda stepped back, stripping off the bloody gloves and throwing them into the trash. She gripped the edge of the sink, suddenly dizzy. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her hollow and nauseous. Nicholas lay on the table chest, heaving. His color was terrible, but the bleeding had stopped. He slowly turned his head to look at her. You have hidden talents, Miss Hayes, he whispered. Don't flatter me. You ruined my clean floor. Linda grabbed a paper towel, soaked it in cold water, and walked back over to him. She wiped the sweat and blood off his face. It was a surprisingly intimate gesture, stripping away the boss and leaving only a bruised, exhausted man. Who did this? She asked quietly. A man named Moretti. Nicholas said, leaning his head into the cold towel. He used to work for my grandfather. He wants the seat. He thought putting a hit on Arthur would create a vacuum. And shooting you. That was him trying to finish the job. Nicholas sighed, the tension slowly leaving his body. He ambushed my car at a red light. My driver is dead. The blunt reality of the words settled over the room like dust. A man was dead. Nicholas had barely survived. I'm sorry, Linda said. She didn't know what else to say. Don't be. It's the life. Nicholas looked at her, his slate-grey eyes locking onto hers. The barrier between them felt impossibly thin in the harsh fluorescent light of the break room. I should not have come here. I put you at risk again. Luca and Matteo are here. The glass is bulletproof. Where else were you going to go? Linda walked over to the coffee pot, pouring a lukewarm cup of drip coffee. She brought it back and handed it to him. Drink it. The sugar will help with the shock. Nicholas took the cup with a shaking hand. He took a sip, grimacing at the stale taste, but he drank it anyway. Why do you do it? Linda asked, leaning against the counter. You don't strike me as a thug. You look like you should be running a hedge fund. Nicholas let out a dry, humorless chuckle. I wanted to run a hedge fund. I have a degree in economics. But Arthur got old. My father passed away. The people circling our family were animals. If I didn't step in, they would have butchered Arthur in his bed and torn the city apart, fighting for the scraps. He looked down at his blood-stained hands. I took the seat to keep the peace. But peace in this city requires violence. Linda looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw a man trapped by obligation, drowning under a ledger he never wanted to inherit. It felt uncomfortably familiar. Well, Linda said softly, you owe me for a suture kit, a ruined shirt, and a destroyed mop. Put it on my tab. Nicholas murmured, a faint ghost of a smile touching his pale lips. Nicholas stayed in the break room for 2 days. Linda dragged a heavy armchair from her apartment down the fire escape and set it up for him. She brought him painkillers, changed his dressings, and fed him leftover pastries and heavily modified soups. He worked constantly from a burner phone, issuing quiet, lethal orders that Linda tried very hard not to overhear. The atmosphere in the cafe shifted from tense to suffocating. Luca, Matteo, Enzo, and Jonas were operating on a hair trigger. They locked the front door. The copper kettle was officially closed for renovations. On Saturday night, the storm finally broke. It wasn't raining outside. The city was quiet, locked in a dry, bitter freeze. Linda was at the espresso machine, cleaning the steam wand out of pure nervous habit. Nicholas was sitting in the corner booth, moving stiffly, his laptop open. At 2 a.m. Enzo's radio crackled. 2 vans, East and West Alley access. They're cutting the cameras. Luca drew his weapon. Positions! The word was a whip crack. The bodyguards moved with terrifying synchronized speed. Matteo killed the main lights, plunging the cafe into darkness, illuminated only by the faint orange glow of the street lamps outside. Jonas moved to the reinforced back door. Enzo flanked the front windows. Luca stepped in front of Nicholas, his body a human shield. Linda, behind the counter, on the floor. Do not move, Nicholas ordered. His voice lacked any trace of pain. It was entirely commanding. Linda didn't argue. She dove behind the heavy oak counter, curling into a tight ball against the espresso machine's plumbing, pulling a heavy metal baking sheet over her head like a pathetic shield. The silence dragged for 30 seconds. Then hell broke loose. A heavy battering ram hit the front door. The deadbolt groaned, but the reinforced steel frame held. Sparks flew outside as a grinder bit into the lock. Thwump, thwump, thwump. Silenced gunfire peppered the polycarbonate window. The glass didn't shatter. It spider-webbed, absorbing the kinetic energy, turning opaque white where the bullets struck. They're breaching the back, Jonas yelled over the noise. An explosion rocked the building. The sound was deafening, a concussive wave that rattled the coffee beans in their hoppers. The back door, heavy steel and all, was blown off its hinges. Gunfire erupted inside the cafe. It was deafening, bright flashes, illuminating the dark room like a strobe light. Linda clamped her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. She smelled cordite burnt metal and plaster dust. She heard men shouting. She heard the heavy, sickening thud of bodies hitting the linoleum floor. It wasn't a movie. It wasn't clean. It was chaotic, terrifying, and brutal. She heard Luca's heavy footsteps rushing past the counter. She heard Nicholas's voice, sharp and cold, calling out targets. Then someone vaulted over the counter. Linda screamed, scrambling backward. A man in a dark tactical vest landed hard on the rubber, matting his gun, sweeping toward her. He wasn't one of Nicholas's men. He had cruel, panicked eyes. He raised his weapon. Before he could pull the trigger, a hand clamped down on the back of his tactical vest. Nicholas hauled the man backward with one arm, ignoring his torn ribs. He slammed the man against the espresso machine, pinning him. The man struggled, but Nicholas drew a small, matte black pistol from his waistband and pressed it directly under the man's chin. He pulled the trigger. The sound was muffled by the man's body. The man went entirely limp, sliding to the floor in a heap of dead weight. Nicholas dropped the gun, clutching his side with a harsh, agonizing gasp. Blood immediately began soaking through his fresh bandages. Linda lay frozen, staring at the dead man 3 feet away from her. The blood pooling on the floor. The absolute, unhesitating violence of it. "Clear!" Luca's voice echoed from the back hallway. "Clear front!" Enzo yelled. Silence descended on the copper kettle. It was a heavy, ringing silence, broken only by the sound of coughing and the settling of plaster dust. Nicholas leaned heavily against the counter, breathing hard. He looked down at Linda. His face was unreadable in the dim light, shadowed and grim. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. Linda shook her head slowly. She couldn't speak. She looked at the body, then at Nicholas. The sheer, overwhelming reality of who he was and what he did crashed down on her. He wasn't just a man who wore nice suits and bought expensive coffee. He was a killer. Nicholas saw the look in her eyes, the terror, the realization. He closed his eyes, a heavy sorrow settling over his features. "It's over," Nicholas said quietly. "Moretti is dead. The ledger is balanced." He turned away from her, clutching his bleeding side. "Luca, clean this up. Do not leave a single trace in this building." It took 3 days for the smell of bleach to fade from the cafe. Nicholas's men were thorough. By the time the sun came up on Sunday morning, the bodies were gone, the blood was scrubbed, the bullet holes in the drywall were spackled, and a new back door was welded into place. They moved like ghosts. Then they left. Luca, Matteo, Enzo, and Jonas packed up their tablet, their cards, and their dark suits. They didn't say goodbye. They just walked out the door and got into the black sedan. The perimeter was lifted. The occupation was over. Linda stood in the middle of her empty cafe. The silence was absolute. There was no gin-rummy game in the corner. There was no silent behemoth judging her customers. The threat was gone. She was safe. She felt completely, utterly hollow. A week passed. The regulars returned. The nursing students stopped speed-walking past the window. The money started trickling back into the register. The bank loan was paid for the month, bolstered by the generous, lost revenue wire transfer Nicholas had forced into her account. On paper, everything was perfect. In reality, Linda jumped at every loud noise. She found herself looking at the corner booth, expecting to see Jonas adjusting his tie. She missed the strange, abrasive company. She missed the feeling that despite the danger, she wasn't facing the crushing weight of the world entirely alone. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The rain had returned, a soft, melancholy drizzle, washing the south side grey. Linda was wiping down the counter, staring blankly at the street. The copper bell chimed. Linda looked up. Nicholas walked in. He didn't have an entourage. There were no armoured SUVs out front. He wore a simple navy peacoat over a grey sweater. He looked rested. The dark circles under his eyes were fading. He walked with a slight stiffness on his left side, but the agonizing tension that usually radiated from him was gone. He walked up to the counter. Linda gripped her bar towel tightly. Her heart gave a strange, complicated flutter. She remembered him bleeding on her floor. She remembered him saving her life. "We're closed for renovations," Linda blurted out, her defense mechanism kicking in. Nicholas looked at the perfectly intact operational cafe. "The sign says open. The sign is a liar." Nicholas offered a small, genuine smile. It changed his entire face, making him look younger, softer. "I came for a coffee, Linda. Just a coffee." Linda studied him. "Are people going to shoot at my windows if I serve you?" "No," Nicholas said softly. "The war is over. The factions are quiet. My grandfather is currently terrorizing his private chef about the quality of his risotto entirely unharmed." Linda let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for a month. "Good." She turned around and pulled a fresh mug. She loaded the grinder with Arthur's expensive Ethiopian beans. The machine hummed its steady, comforting tune. She poured the shot, steamed the milk perfectly, and set the cup on the counter. $5, Linda said. Nicholas reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $10 bill, and slid it across the counter. "Keep the change." He didn't leave. He stood there holding the warm mug, looking at her. The silence between them wasn't heavy or terrifying anymore. It was just quiet. "I wanted to apologize," Nicholas finally said. "For the mess. For the fear. I dragged you into a world you never should have seen. You didn't drag me. I picked up a bag of oranges." Linda crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "Besides, I got a new espresso boiler out of it, and my floor has never been cleaner." Nicholas laughed. It was a real laugh, rich and relaxed. "Enzo is very thorough." "Yeah, well, tell him I said thanks." Nicholas took a sip of his coffee. He looked around the cafe, the battered wood, the mismatched chairs, the heavy polycarbonate window. "You built a good place here, Linda. It's tough, like you." "It survives," Linda said, quietly. "That's all it knows how to do. Maybe it's time to do more than just survive." Nicholas set the mug down. He looked at her, his slate-grey eyes steady and entirely focused on her. There was no ledger between them anymore, just a man and a woman who had seen each other at their absolute worst and lived to tell the tale. "I don't have a security detail anymore," Nicholas said, his voice dropping slightly. "I drive my own car now. I have free evenings." Linda's breath hitched. She looked at him, feeling the cynical armor finally crack, letting a sliver of terrifying, genuine hope slip in. "Are you asking me on a date, Nicholas Costello?" Nicholas smiled, the kind of smile that promised a lot of trouble, but the good kind. "I am, assuming you're willing to risk being seen with a man who drinks terrible coffee." Linda looked at the $10 bill on the counter, then back at him. She reached out and tapped the rim of his mug. "Pick me up at 8, Linda said. "And if you bring an armored car, I'm locking the door." Nicholas nodded, once his eyes warm. 8 o'clock. No armor. He turned and walked out the door. The copper bell chimed brightly behind him. Linda stood behind the counter, the smell of roasted coffee and fresh rain in the air, and for the first time in a very long time, she actually smiled. Did Linda's unexpected courage and Nicholas's fierce protection keep you on the edge of your seat? Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can pull you into a world you never imagined, and the hardest hearts can find solace in the most unexpected places. If you loved this gritty, slow-burn mafia romance, hit that like button and share it with your fellow book lovers. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another thrilling, emotional story. Drop a comment below. What would you do if 4 bodyguards showed up at your job?